The moment you stop chasing, someone begins running toward you. Not because you changed their mind overnight, but because they suddenly realize they may never have another chance. What if the silence between you is not the end of your story? What if, at this very moment, the person you cannot stop thinking about is wrestling with a decision that could change both of your lives forever? Stay until the end, because the final truth explains why the next move must come from them, not from you. Have you ever felt that strange moment when someone begins acting differently the instant you stop reaching for them? Leave a comment with the word "ready" if you've experienced this. As we continue, you may discover that what seemed like rejection was actually the beginning of a much deeper psychological transformation. If these insights are helping you understand yourself and human nature more deeply, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message today. Every conversation we have here brings more awareness to people searching for answers beyond appearances. Now let's continue, because the next revelation explains why genuine action always comes after inner transformation, not before. There comes a moment in every meaningful connection when something unexpected happens. The more one person chases, explains, or tries to hold everything together, the less clearly the other person sees the value of what stands before them. But the moment that pursuit ends, perception begins to change. What looked permanent suddenly feels fragile. What seemed guaranteed suddenly appears capable of disappearing forever. This is not simply about romance, it reflects a deeper movement within the human mind. Human beings often fail to recognize the importance of something while it remains constantly available. Familiarity creates comfort, but it can also create blindness. Only when the possibility of loss becomes real does the unconscious begin revealing emotions that had been hidden beneath routine, fear, or emotional avoidance. This is why silence carries such extraordinary psychological weight. Silence removes distraction. It removes constant reassurance. It removes the illusion that another opportunity will always exist. In that empty space, a person can no longer rely on old habits or comforting assumptions. They are left alone with their own thoughts, and those thoughts often become impossible to escape. Memories return with surprising clarity. Conversations once ignored suddenly replay in the mind. Small moments that seemed ordinary begin carrying unexpected emotional significance because the unconscious recognizes what the conscious mind refused to acknowledge. Many people mistake this shift as manipulation, but it is often the opposite. It is reality finally breaking through denial. The mind naturally protects itself from uncomfortable truths until circumstances force those truths into awareness. When distance becomes genuine, the fear of losing something meaningful awakens parts of the personality that had remained asleep. Pride begins to weaken. Certainty gives way to doubt. Emotional defenses that once seemed unshakable develop small but meaningful cracks. Behind those cracks emerges an honest question that had never been fully faced before. What if the person who quietly walked away was never as replaceable as I believed? That single realization carries enough emotional force to transform hesitation into movement and uncertainty into intention. Regret rarely arrives the moment a meaningful opportunity is ignored. Instead, it waits quietly beneath the surface, hidden by pride, distraction, or the comforting belief that there will always be another chance. The human psyche has a remarkable ability to postpone emotional truth when facing it feels too uncomfortable. Someone may convince themselves that distancing was the right decision, that remaining silent is easier than being vulnerable, or that time will eventually erase what they feel. Yet the unconscious keeps a careful record of every authentic connection, preserving emotions that the conscious mind tries to dismiss. What appears forgotten is often only buried. This hidden dimension of the personality, the part that stores unresolved emotions and rejected desires, eventually begins demanding attention. A familiar place, an unexpected song, or even a quiet evening alone can awaken memories with surprising intensity. The mind starts comparing every new interaction to the one it once overlooked. It notices the absence of qualities that seemed ordinary before but now feel impossible to replace. The realization is unsettling because it exposes the difference between temporary attraction and genuine emotional significance. When this process begins, people often experience an inner conflict they cannot easily explain. One part of them wants to protect the ego by insisting they made the correct choice. Another part quietly admits that fear, insecurity, or emotional immaturity influence their decisions far more than logic ever did. This conflict creates psychological tension, and tension always seeks resolution. The easiest path would be to continue pretending nothing has changed, but authentic emotions have a way of resurfacing until they are acknowledged. As these buried feelings grow stronger, the fear of regret becomes more powerful than the fear of vulnerability. The possibility of losing someone forever no longer feels like an abstract idea, but a deeply personal reality. The walls built to protect the heart begin weakening, not because someone else demanded it, but because the individual can no longer ignore the truth emerging from within their own unconscious, where every meaningful bond leaves a lasting imprint that time alone cannot erase. There is a profound difference between silence that is used as punishment and silence that emerges from self-respect. One seeks to control another person's emotions, while the other simply creates space for truth to reveal itself. When you stop filling every silence with explanations, reassurance, or repeated attempts to be understood, something unexpected begins to happen. The psychological landscape changes. The other person is no longer reacting to your words. Instead, they are left alone with their own inner world, where avoidance becomes far more difficult. Most people believe clarity comes through endless conversation, yet the unconscious often speaks most loudly when conversation ends. Constant communication can become a distraction, allowing both people to avoid the deeper questions that truly matter. As long as someone knows you will always reach out again, apologize first, or keep the connection alive, they never have to confront what your absence would actually mean. Your presence becomes part of the background of their life, appreciated perhaps, but rarely examined with full awareness. Silence interrupts that pattern. It removes the certainty that tomorrow will look exactly like yesterday. Without your constant emotional availability, the mind naturally begins searching for what has changed. It notices the missing messages, the absence of familiar routines, and the quiet places where your energy once existed. These empty spaces are not merely external. They awaken internal reflection. The person begins asking questions that were previously ignored. Why does this absence feel heavier than expected? Why do certain memories return so vividly? Why does moving forward suddenly feel more difficult than remaining still? This is where genuine insight often begins. Without the noise of immediate reactions, the unconscious has room to organize forgotten emotions, unresolved conflicts, and hidden attachments. Feelings that were buried beneath pride or distraction slowly rise into awareness. The person starts recognizing that what they miss is not simply attention or companionship, but the unique emotional experience that existed only within your connection. In that quiet realization, perception changes, and what once seemed ordinary begins to reveal its true and irreplaceable value. Long before a person reaches out, sends a message, or stands before you with honest words, something far more important has already taken place within them. Every meaningful action begins as an invisible transformation. The outer world merely reflects what has already shifted in the depths of the psyche. This is why genuine change cannot be forced through pressure, persuasion, or repeated attempts to convince someone to choose differently. Until the inner world changes, the outer behavior remains trapped in familiar patterns. Many people mistake hesitation for a lack of feeling, but hesitation often reveals an unresolved conflict between desire and fear. One part of the personality longs for closeness, intimacy, and emotional truth. Another part clings to old defenses, convinced that vulnerability will lead to disappointment, rejection, or the loss of control. These opposing forces create an exhausting inner struggle. From the outside, it appears as confusion or emotional distance. Beneath the surface, however, the individual is confronting parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. Real transformation begins when those protective patterns stop serving their purpose. The excuses that once felt convincing begin to lose their strength. Pride no longer provides comfort. Emotional walls that once seemed necessary start feeling like prisons instead of protection. The person gradually recognizes that avoiding vulnerability has not brought peace. It has only created loneliness disguised as independence. This realization is rarely dramatic. It unfolds quietly through moments of reflection, restless nights, unexpected memories, and the growing awareness that something valuable has been slipping away while they remained emotionally frozen. As this internal shift deepens, the image they once held of themselves begins to change. They are no longer trying to prove they need no one. Instead, they begin asking what kind of person they truly want to become. This question transforms every future decision. Reaching out is no longer driven by panic or temporary loneliness, but by a sincere recognition that meaningful relationships require courage, responsibility, and emotional honesty. Only after this inner transformation takes root does the next step become possible, because authentic commitment is born within the soul long before it is ever visible in the world. There are moments when a person believes they can always find someone else. The mind reassures itself that every connection is replaceable, that another opportunity will eventually appear, and that walking away carries no lasting consequence. This belief creates a false sense of security, allowing hesitation, pride, or emotional avoidance to feel harmless. Yet the unconscious does not measure relationships by quantity. It measures them by meaning. There are encounters that leave such a distinct imprint on the psyche that no comparison can erase them, no matter how many new faces appear afterward. At first, this realization remains hidden beneath distraction. Daily routines continue, new conversations begin, life appears to move forward. But over time, subtle comparisons emerge without invitation. A familiar laugh is missing. A certain feeling of emotional safety cannot be recreated. Someone may meet kind people, interesting people, even attractive people, yet something remains incomplete. The connection they dismissed carried qualities that were never fully appreciated until they were gone. What seemed ordinary was, in truth, extraordinarily rare. This awakening often begins with a quiet question the conscious mind tries to avoid. What if that person was never simply another chapter, but someone who reflected a part of me I cannot easily find elsewhere? The deeper this question settles into the unconscious, the more difficult it becomes to ignore. It challenges old assumptions about love, attachment, and personal value. The individual starts recognizing that genuine compatibility is not built from perfection or constant excitement. It is built from a unique meeting of minds, emotions, and experiences that cannot be manufactured on demand. Once this understanding takes hold, the fear of losing something irreplaceable becomes stronger than the comfort of remaining emotionally distant. Pride begins surrendering to longing. Certainty gives way to humility. The desire to protect the ego slowly loses its power because preserving one's image no longer feels as important as preserving a connection that carried uncommon depth. In that moment, reaching out is no longer about chasing what was lost. It becomes an attempt to honor a truth that the heart recognized only after absence revealed what presence had quietly been offering all along. The way you see yourself silently influences the way others experience your presence. When someone constantly seeks validation, approval, or reassurance from another person, they unintentionally communicate that their emotional stability depends on being chosen. This creates an imbalance where one person becomes the pursuer and the other becomes the person who decides the value of the connection. But when an individual turns inward and begins rebuilding their own sense of worth, everything begins to shift. The energy they carry changes because they are no longer asking someone else to complete what they have learned to honor within themselves. Self-worth is not about becoming cold, distant, or pretending not to care. It is about recognizing that your value does not disappear simply because someone fails to recognize it immediately. A person who understands their own worth can love deeply without abandoning themselves. They can appreciate another person's presence while still standing firmly in their own identity. This emotional balance creates a different kind of attraction because it reflects confidence, stability, and inner strength. When someone stops chasing and starts choosing themselves, the relationship dynamic often transforms. The absence of desperation creates space for curiosity. The silence becomes meaningful because it no longer carries the energy of waiting for someone to return. Instead, it communicates that life continues, growth continues, and happiness is not dependent on one person's decision. This shift can awaken something powerful in the other person because they begin to see the individual not as someone who is always available, but as someone with a complete inner world. The most powerful connections are not built between two people who are afraid of being alone. They are built between two people who have learned that love is a choice rather than a necessity. When you stop seeking permission to be valued, you naturally begin attracting relationships that recognize your presence instead of taking it for granted. The person who once overlooked your importance may begin seeing you differently, not because you changed to gain their attention, but because you finally returned your attention to yourself. True value becomes visible when it no longer needs to beg to be seen. Every meaningful connection eventually reaches a moment where emotion alone is not enough. Feelings can exist for a long time beneath the surface, but transformation requires courage. There comes a point when a person must decide whether they will remain protected behind old fears or step forward into vulnerability. This emotional threshold is where many people struggle because taking the next step means confronting everything they have avoided within themselves. Fear often disguises itself as logic. A person may convince themselves that staying silent is the mature choice, that waiting is safer, or that distance prevents disappointment. But beneath these explanations, there is often a deeper fear of being seen completely. To reach towards someone means accepting the possibility of rejection, misunderstanding, or emotional pain. It requires surrendering the illusion of control and accepting that genuine connection always carries some level of risk. The greatest obstacle is not always the other person. Many times, the real barrier exists within the individual. Old experiences, past disappointments, and protective habits create invisible walls around the heart. These walls may have once provided safety, but over time they can prevent the very connection the person secretly desires. The next step becomes possible only when the individual recognizes that avoiding pain has also meant avoiding emotional fulfillment. This inner battle often creates a period of hesitation. The person may move closer emotionally, then retreat. They may want to speak but remain silent. They may feel the desire to reconnect but struggle against the voice telling them to protect their pride. Yet every moment of reflection weakens the power of fear because awareness begins replacing automatic reactions. When courage finally becomes stronger than fear, action naturally follows. The person no longer reaches out because they are afraid of being alone. They reach out because they understand the value of what they almost lost. The step forward becomes an expression of growth, not desperation. It represents a willingness to be honest, to accept uncertainty, and to choose authenticity over emotional protection. The deepest connections are often restored not when fear disappears completely, but when someone decides that what they could gain is more meaningful than what they risk losing. A true reunion is not simply two people returning to where they left off. It is a meeting between two transformed versions of themselves. When time, distance, and reflection have changed the way people understand their emotions, coming back together carries a deeper meaning. It is no longer about repeating old patterns or trying to recreate the past. It becomes an opportunity to build something more conscious, where both individuals recognize what they ignored before. Many people believe that missing someone is enough to create a lasting connection, but longing alone cannot heal what was unresolved. A meaningful return requires awareness. It requires understanding the fears, insecurities, and unconscious patterns that created distance in the first place. Without this inner work, two people can come together again but still carry the same wounds that separated them before. The most powerful connections often reveal hidden parts of ourselves. Another person can become a mirror, reflecting our strengths, our fears, and the places where we still need to grow. This is why losing someone important can feel so transformative. Their absence does not only create emptiness, it creates an opportunity for self-discovery. It forces a person to examine what they truly value, what they have been avoiding, and what kind of relationship they genuinely want to create. When someone chooses to take the next step after deep reflection, the action carries a different energy. It is not driven by temporary loneliness or fear of being alone. It comes from a clearer understanding of the connection and the willingness to show up differently. They are not returning to reclaim what they had. They are returning with the awareness needed to protect and appreciate what they almost lost. A genuine reunion happens when both people are no longer trying to complete each other, but are willing to meet each other as whole individuals. The bond becomes stronger because it is built on choice, understanding, and emotional maturity. Sometimes the greatest proof of a meaningful connection is not that two people never separate, but that after facing their own inner battles, they find the courage to choose each other with greater consciousness than before. The deepest connections in life are not always recognized in the moment they appear. Sometimes it takes distance, silence, and the possibility of loss for someone to understand the true impact of another person's presence. What was once overlooked begins to reveal its meaning. What was taken for granted begins to feel precious, and what was avoided begins demanding attention from the deepest parts of the mind. But the greatest transformation does not happen when someone finally decides to return. It happens when you stop measuring your worth by whether they do. Your power is not found in waiting for someone to realize your value. Your power is found in realizing it yourself. When you choose growth, peace, and self-respect, you create the foundation for healthier connections, whether that person takes the next step or life opens another path for you. Sometimes people return because they finally understand what they almost lost. Sometimes they reach out because the silence revealed emotions they could no longer ignore. But the most important shift is that you are no longer standing in the same place, hoping to be chosen. You have become someone who understands that love should meet you with the same honesty, effort, and depth that you offer. A meaningful connection is not built on fear of losing someone. It is built on the freedom to choose each other consciously. The person who truly values you will not only miss your presence, they will recognize the responsibility of protecting the bond you share. And if they take that next step, it will not be because you convince them. It will be because they finally became aware of what was always in front of them. The greatest relationships are not created by chasing, forcing, or proving your worth. They are created when two people have the courage to face themselves, overcome their fears, and meet each other from a place of emotional truth.